Good evening, good morning, whenever you are tuning in. This is the Three Things, the Christmas edition with your host, that's me, Preston Smith, your licensed detective and risk intelligence investigator in Central Europe. And we are brought to you by The Corners magazine, www.thecorners.pl, as well as by my company, www.cddi.pl, in case you need risk intelligence work. And even during the Christmas holidays, we are working like Santa's little helpers, actually working like dogs. To tell you the truth, I don't know how they wear these hats because they're so incredibly hot. I'm afraid to take it off though because I have such an incredible hat head. It's going to be ridiculous. But what are we going to talk about this show, this episode? Well, three things, and as usual, a little bit more. We'll talk a little bit about current events, chiefly, this isn't really one of the things, just kind of an intro, but we can't skip it. The Serbian elections going on right now on this Sunday. By the time this episode comes out, we will know who the victor is. Will it be Aleksandar Vučić and the SNS party, the guys who ruled forever, or will it be a coalition, the opposition coalition that came together to protest violence in Serbia? There's only so much I can say. Actually, we're not in Serbia, but I don't want to get in too much trouble. Let's talk about the second thing very quickly. Hey, well, the second thing. Now, some of you may go, the what? The UBO registry. Yeah, I guess I should tell you what before you go. The what? But the ultimate beneficiary registry, basically, is how you want to define it. And what this is a registry which tells us in Europe who is actually behind different companies. And first they wanted it, then they didn't want it. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because for you investigators out there, and not only people who just want transparency and clarity, well, this is a topic, and it's actually interesting. You hold on a second. We are going to have the war in Ukraine update, but also we have a bonus. We got a guest, John Gabrovic, longtime expat, entrepreneur, business person extraordinaire in Poland. And let me tell you, this guy's got some stories. And his stories are interesting, maybe not for the reasons you might expect. But we get into some direct, what is it like when you deal with not just the police, but the Secret Service here? And he didn't do anything wrong. And it's kind of a humorous story, but I actually don't want him to talk about this just, a lot of people say, let's ridicule the police, bust on the police, let's bash the Secret Service, whatever. No, I want to talk about it from a little bit of a different angle, and of course to let John talk. And I think you will find it very interesting. But before we get to John, we've got a lot to talk about. So let's get into the first thing. Okay, the first thing, the ultimate beneficiary registry, how it works and why it's not open for everyone to use in Europe, when actually I think it should be. But before we get it, let's talk about Serbia very quickly. So this is not really going to be a first thing. This is going to be like half a thing to introduce the first thing, which really kind of does have something to do with UBO registries. But right now, as I said, down in Serbia, we have parliamentary elections ongoing, and we will see what happens with the longtime ruling SNS party, which actually, Serbian politics are very, very complicated. They've always been complicated, but we tend to kind of lump together the ruling party and Aleksandar Vučić. And Aleksandar Vučić is actually the president. He's been kind of the political strongman, and he was the head of the party forever. But remember, we separate the government, which are the ministry, the cabinet of ministries. That's one thing, and that is decided by who has the most parliamentary votes and the presidency, just in case, because for American viewers, sometimes European politics get very confusing. Actually, for me, they get very confusing sometimes too, especially British politics, actually. But in Serbia right now, what we have is a situation where we may see a changing of the guard. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say this. I don't like to do anything that might influence elections, but by the time this show goes up, those elections, well, at least the first round will be over. Going into the elections, it looked as if Vučić and the SNS party, actually not Vučić, he's not up for re-election, he's president. Sorry, see, I already made it more complicated than it is. But the SNS was probably going to was leading, possibly going to win, although there was a strong opposition. But the problem in Serbia is the opposition has been fractured forever. There are other problems in Serbia in that the SNS and Vučić got tons of airtime on TV. That influences elections. But how did we even come to this? Because this is an early parliamentary election, a snap election. That means the election's coming before it was originally scheduled. Again, for you American viewers that maybe don't follow this that closely. Well, we had back in May, we had these mass shootings. And then all summer, we had protests, which for once, something kind of unified the Serbian opposition. And altogether, I think we got 18 parties in the running. Now, this suddenly, they kept pushing, they kept demanding early elections. You had every single weekend after weekend, sometimes, there were hundreds of thousands. Then as, protests go on, sometimes they're a little bit less. And finally, Vučić said, yeah, we're gonna actually dissolve parliament. We're gonna call for new elections on December 17th, which is today. And we will see what happens. Now, there are many reasons why this is important and why this goes beyond Serbia. And a lot of this goes into the lead up that has to do with Kosovo, has to do with Russia, has to do with stability in the Balkans. And I'm going to crystallize this into a thumbnail. Now, that doesn't make any sense. I don't even know if those are metaphors. But I'm going to try to sum this up just in 5 paragraphs. Okay, paragraph 1. As you know, there was a war in Kosovo years and years ago. It took forever to come to some sort of a settlement. Finally, in 2013, the two sides kind of agreed to get along and sort of live side by side. And there were obviously I don't want to go through the whole history of the war in Kosovo, et cetera, but it was a very bitter war. The U.S. got involved. Some people like me called it Madeleine Albright's war. The Chinese embassy got blown up in Belgrade. U.S. fighters blew up. They kept hitting the electrical, the power station with like weird gummy stuff and would short it out. And it became basically it became traumatic for the Serbs. Obviously, it was traumatic for the Kosovo ethnic Albanians in Kosovo, who were basically many, just like that, tens of thousands, then hundred, the whole country had to flee. All kinds of atrocities, etc., committed not only by one side. But anyway, back to 2013. There was an agreement negotiated that in the part of Kosovo that was dominated by ethnic Serbs, eventually there would be formed a community of Serb municipalities, so they would have some sort of self-governance. And also they had become kind of like enclaves following a war that was very bitter, and there were worries about violence, of retribution. The KLA had always been down there, whatever you want to think about the KLA. It was not always, it was certainly not a nonviolent institution. And then as Kosovo became more and more independent, although it hasn't been recognized by Serbia and by some other countries, even the EU, like Spain, this demand for some kind of self-representation in the form of this community of Serb municipalities became more and more critical for the Serbs living there. And they've complained for years and years that they're harassed, that they're not represented fairly, et cetera, et cetera. Now the ethnic Albanians in Kosovo, the Kosovo government, led by Albin Kurti, they have a completely different take on this, have constantly said that Serbia is trying to provoke problems, that Serbia puts their troops on the border, sometimes it does. Serbia tries to intimidate Albania, et cetera, et cetera. Serbia says the Kosovo government is building it with weapons. And anyway, all this came to a head about a year ago when suddenly, and I'm not blaming this just on Kosovo, I'm just saying when suddenly this kind of restarted, all these problems, or at least they restarted in earnest, when suddenly the Kosovo government said, that's it, it's time for the ethnic Serbs in Kosovo to have Kosovo license plates, have Kosovo IDs, but that for Serbia and for the ethnic Serbs living there that don't want to live in a Kosovo that is not part of Serbia, at least that's what the majority seem to act like, they saw this as Serbia de facto recognizing Kosovo as an independent state, because suddenly even the ethnic Serbs there, their IDs aren't recognized, their driver's plates aren't recognized, etc. And then everything kind of went crazy. There were protests. The protests became violent. Many times they were violent. The ethnic Serbs eventually that were in North Kosovo in the municipalities that worked in, say, the mayor's office, whatever, they walked off the job. The cops walked off the job. Different cops were arrested. Both sides arrested cops from the other side. Things became it became more and more out of control. Serbia did put their troops on the border. The EU freaked out. The US freaked out. And we were like, oh no, what's going to happen next? And then probably because of pressure of the EU and the United States, things calmed down a bit and they started talking about a normalization agreement. Nobody really technically actually signed on this agreement, although you get EU representatives that will say, no, actually it's legally binding. I don't really know how that's true, because Vučić certainly said he's not going to sign on anything that's going to recognize Kosovo as an independent state, although sometimes he intimates that he will go forward with normalizing relations and falling in line with the EU, and Serbia eventually joined the EU. That was a very long paragraph, wasn't it? Now, what happens next? Up, down, these two sides not really agreeing, and then you had a couple of months ago, we talked about on the show, this kind of bizarre paramilitary raid near Zvečan in the Banska Monastery, where suddenly 30, I think it was 30 now, I'm getting senile, 30 ethnic Serbs were basically confronted by Albanian police. They had a shootout which lasted all day and into the night, because the Serbs holed up in a monastery. Most of the Serbs got away. 3 of them were killed. 1 Kosovo ethnic Albanian police officer was killed, and this just kind of threw a wrench into everything. Then, of course, the U.S. steps in, and basically at the time, Christopher Hill, the ambassador to Serbia from the U.S., basically said to the Serbs, like, what are you guys doing? The EU steps in. They flip out. They basically censure the Serbs in EU Parliament. Everyone says it's time for you guys, both sides, to get back on track, although, yeah, the Serbs kind of looked like the bad boys in that time. But, you know, the ethnic Albanian contingent, or the Kosovo government, if you want to just go ahead and call it that, they do kind of provocative things. So what has happened today, to make a very long, I know this is far more than 5 paragraphs, make a long story short, not only do we have elections in Serbia, which will indicate which way Serbia goes, because the SNS and Vučić have always been kind of viewed by the West as a little bit too close to Russia, to the point that the U.S. sanctioned his head of the Secret Services, Alexander Vulin, for being too close to Russia and supposedly too close to organized crime. Vulin resigned prior to the elections, sort of, so that couldn't be a focal point of the opposition. But still, there is that kind of worry from the West, and the West wants Serbia to be more committed towards EU accession, falling in line with sanctions against Russia, the Ukrainian war. You get it, right? Now, that's one angle. The other angle is this Kosovo constant headbutting, where the EU and different groups in the EU and different newspapers in the EU and press, they would like to see the end of the Vučić regime, because they see him as somebody that's stopping this normalization process or holding it back, and kind of giving a free pass a lot of times, if you ask me, to the Kosovo side. And here's an example. On the day that we have these elections, right, in Serbia, which need to be free and fair, and you can criticize the Serbian media, you can criticize a lot of things in Serbia, sometimes the behavior of the police, organized crime groups getting into not only the government, but influencing the police, being attached to the Montenegrin crime groups. There's tons of stuff to talk about. I'm not going to be a Serb apologist here, but I'm going to point something out, that on the day that they're having these elections in Serbia, there were 2 things that, if you wanted to make the Serbs mad and make things even more difficult, and you're sitting in Kosovo, you could do a couple of things, and they didn't. One is They did not allow ethnic Serbs in Kosovo to vote in Kosovo at polling stations in the Serbian elections. Now, this may be a subtle thing, but let me kind of feed this to you slowly. I know some of you are like, you don't have to feed anything to me slowly. I understand exactly what you're talking about, but let me just feed this to you slowly. What this really means, they're already saying, no, we're a separate country, we're a separate state, we're already independent, and of course, you cannot vote here if you're going to vote for Serbian parliamentary elections, even though there was a tradition, because remember, there was Serbia saw Kosovo as part of Serbia, and then they had this war, and ever since then, Serbia's saying, yeah, okay, we had the war, maybe we did behave badly, maybe we didn't, but we didn't agree that Kosovo is independent, which means that our people, the ethnic Serbs in Kosovo, should be able to vote for parliament. That's their rationale. The Kosovo government is saying, no, we're already independent, even though technically they're not recognized yet in the UN. Some countries in the EU don't even recognize them. Serbia obviously doesn't. They're saying, no, you cannot vote. Now, but the thing here, the sticky crux of the situation is that for years there's a tradition that, yeah, they could vote, and the OSCE would monitor the voting. And Kosovo just said, no, we're not going to do it. This did not make the EU, the Europeans happy, didn't make the US happy. It's like, come on, guys. You know, Prime Minister Kurti, do you guys have to always do something to provoke everything? But then they did one other thing, starting actually last night. I think I said somewhere there was actually a day, but it was really last night. What did they do? They said no Serbian license plates allowed in Kosovo, right? So now we're all the way back first, full circle to what caused all the problems to begin with. And you got to ask yourself, is the intent just to cause more instability, more riots, more problems with KFOR troops? Because the riots got out of control in the past, KFOR troops got hurt, etc. You know, you kind of got to, I'm not at all sitting here saying if you're Serbian, vote this way or vote that way. I'm not saying vote for Ivica Dačić or don't vote for him, but vote for Vučić. I'm not saying that has nothing to do with it. I'm not even going to say who's right and wrong when it comes to the constant headbutting between Kosovo and Serbia. But I will say that this was very ill-timed. It's just not very nice. So anyway, that was half a thing, just to let you know what's going on. If the SNS and Vučić loses, things in Serbia will get very, very interesting, because that part of that party is very well supported by nationalists, by the Orthodox Church. Well, let's just say we're going to see a bunch of protests if that happens. I just don't think people are going to lose elections. I don't want to call people sore losers, but I think it's going to be emotional. And then we'll find out what happens as far which way does Serbia go. And we don't even know for sure which way Serbia goes if Vučić and the SNS stays in power, because he's been very good at playing, yeah, we do want to eventually one day join the EU. Let's take EU money. Let's stay on track, when they're kind of taking Chinese money too and close to Russia, whatever. Very interesting. We'll see next week. But now let's get into the real first thing, which the real first thing actually is what I was talking about, the UBO registry, the ultimate beneficiary ownership registry. Now, what is this? Okay. Why is it important? Why shouldn't it, why it should be just like, if you ask me, just a worldwide thing. What it is after years of complaints about transparency and this whole offshore system, which if you live in Europe, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you live in the States, maybe you do, maybe you don't, because we really mix things up. You've got basically offshore. You can register a company, technically it's like offshore, but in Delaware or in Nevada, so it's kind of confusing for what is that? What does this mean? But basically offshore means you're kind of beyond your local tax regime. And so if you don't know what this is, if you do know what it is and you're living in Europe, I'm not trying to offend you, I'm just simplifying this. But a lot of times what we would see in Central Europe, especially in the 90s, the 2000s, whatever, you would find that, say, politicians or public servants or public officials at a state company had secret offshore companies that no one knew about, and that's where the backhanders, the bribes, everything were being sent. Sometimes they'd put them in their children's names, so it would be harder to prove it was really for them. They say, no, this is my kids' money. We've been putting money in the piggy bank in Jersey every year since he was been born, whatever. They would come up with all kinds of stories. And it's very difficult for prosecutors to prosecute. But then we had things like the Panama Papers, the Pandora Papers, where there were huge leaks because sometimes these offshore lawyers, they would get mad at each other, or they wouldn't keep their information safe. And then suddenly, bam, we'd have a big explosion, and you'd find out that, I don't know, the vice prime minister of some country actually, crazy money, $600 million in an account somewhere, and he'd never actually done anything but work as a politician. So how do you do it, right? These types of things would show up, cause a political ruckus. Sometimes people get arrested, sometimes they wouldn't, etc. But that offshore setup, which really kind of was created by the British, kind of sort of, because you've got, the UK, City of London, then you've got this kind of the first circles where you'd have like Guernsey, Jersey, whatever, and then it'd go out another circle. Eventually, you get to the Bahamas or Hong Kong, or wherever, and you would have these kind of shell companies set up. They could be a real company that's functioning, but it's companies set up in Cyprus, whatever. And as a investigator, sometimes we'd hit these things, and you'd hit the mother lode and they would just explode, and there's more and more and more. It's this spider web, and you would find out, well, how come you never see who is really behind these companies? It just might be like Greek lawyers or some British lawyers that live in Panama, and you're like, well, who really owns the company? Because it seems like this company belongs to this guy because, maybe something leaked in the press or somebody said, well, we did this, but we paid that company, but it's really him. Things like that would start coming up, okay? Now, what the ultimate beneficiary registry, the ownership registry did was, for example, in Poland, suddenly you had to declare who really owned a company, right? So a company's formed, a spółka, I started to speak Polish to you guys. You got a limited liability company, but there's the guys who are on the board are going to have to sign a legal declaration to say who really is the ultimate owner of the company. Now, for a brief period of time, after a lot of lobbying, and because it seemed like the sensible thing to do, these registries, and these were actually, this isn't something that's brand new. They were starting to create these things because it's a lot of work way back in like 2014, 15, 16, 17. I'm not sure of the year, but it wasn't yesterday. The whole point was that, yes, these would be transparent, and you would be able, a member of the public, a consultant investigator like me could run a name and I could see it. And yes, for example, in Poland, it did happen, right? In a lot of countries, it did happen, it had happened. But then suddenly there started resistance. There started to be resistance, and resistance went to the courts because it came into conflict with supposed privacy laws. And then they ruled that no, these registries are not going to be open to the public. They are going to exist. They do exist, but they're open to law enforcement. Now, some of you out there, the naive contingent, will say, well, that's okay. As long as the cops can see it, then what's the problem? No. Now, I don't know what country you live in, but I have never lived in a country where I thought, or I believed for a minute, that as long as the cops had access, that everything would be fine, or as long as the prosecutors had access. Really, this goes back to the role of journalists, but it also goes back to just your rights. If I'm going to buy a company, and let's say I'm going to buy a company that makes yogurt, right? I want to know if the guy that I'm buying the company from also has other interests that maybe produce yogurt. This is like the simplest example, right? Because what if and I've seen this in Investigator. What if I say, I come in, we do the due diligence, looks like a great company, I buy it for a reasonable price, he's gonna make money, I'm gonna start producing yogurt. It might be the best yogurt around, or it's pretty good yogurt, and theoretically, we're gonna do good business and build up the company and grow and hire more people, whatever. But what happens is, this is the kind of thing that happens. You go in there, you do your due diligence, but you can't see the ultimate owner. You just see, maybe you see the guys on the board, Maybe you see that there are companies behind this company in Luxembourg, but then you try to go further, maybe Cyprus, and you just hit Greek lawyers, whatever, and you don't know. What you may be doing at that point, and this is like, forget bribes. Bribes is another reason, right? But forget bribes. But at that point, you may be putting your money into this yogurt company, and that money is, you know, they leave. Those guys leave. You're taking over the company now. They take that money, goes to the ultimate beneficiary, some guy who's like the yogurt king of the world, who all he really wanted to do was start a new factory with brand new yogurt making equipment. And I guess, I don't know, new cows or something. And so you put the money in, you start to produce yogurt, and then the next thing you know, you've got a new competitor who's got you bought all the old stuff that you're going to try to maybe slowly replace or improve. But he starts a new factory, he's got new stuff, you signed non-competes with the guys on the board, but none of the guys on the board are in the new factory, right? They're not there. You know, they're not there. And you don't know because you don't have access to that ultimate beneficiary registry. Now you say, okay, well, sue him. Go to the cops. Well, come on. It's not that simple. Suing somebody in civil court is not the same as going to the cops. This is just one simple reason why. I'm not saying that an ultimate beneficiary registry has to say how much money somebody makes, has to give away, I don't know, all of their addresses or their children's names or whatever. But the fact that it was public was a good thing. Now, the crazy thing is that at the same time that the EU decides that that's not going to be publicly available and that's going to be, you know, just for the cops, there's new EU legislation that's supposed to try to simplify recovery, confiscation when we get into assets. Say you win in civil court, you should be paid. You don't get paid. You want to know the assets. So now there's new legislation that each country is going to have to adapt to a new set of rules that's going to make asset confiscation easier to accomplish. But I don't know how it's going to make that, you know, because then what happens is you are just relying on government institutions to do all this work for you. Well, think about it. Especially in our region, in Central Europe, that's where I'm based. I don't know if I said that. Did I say we're coming to you from Warsaw, Poland? I don't think I did. Well, we are coming to you from Warsaw, Poland, from MRP Studios in Praga. But in our part of the world, we have oligarchs. Oligarchs are billionaires. There's billionaires in the States too. These guys have their fingers in a zillion different pots. When guys have that much influence in our part of the world, you find that for some magical reason, prosecutors, cops, even judges don't seem that interested in prosecuting them, or they always seem to win their lawsuits. They never seem to pay big fines, never go to jail. I mean, I can't, you know, it's hard to, I don't even know if I remember a top politician in the core Central Europe recently that went to prison for something, even though they've been accused of all kinds of things in the past. So that's just kind of the way it is. Call me a skeptic, but I think the UBO registry should exist, and it should exist everywhere, to be honest. I think land registries should all be open. I'm all for transparency. Maybe it's because I'm poor and I don't have anything. I'm just a poor, meager, landless detective. We'll call it like that. But let's get into the second thing. And what we're going to do, we're going to change the order of the show this week a little bit. We're going to get into the second thing and do the Ukrainian war report next. A lot to talk about there, including, yes, U.S. politics, the hunter, yes. So we're going to talk about that. And then we will end on an up note, I believe, with an interview with John Gabrovic. But for now, that's enough UBOing, that's enough complaining about transparency. Let's get into really transparent areas, especially the time period prior to the Ukrainian war, and talk about what is going on now. Part two, the second thing, the war in Ukraine update. Now, there's a lot to wade through in this. This is going to be a little bit longer than previous updates because we're going to get in, again, we're going to talk about the money. But I wanted to make one thing clear because of some of the developments that happened this week. And I'm not sure that the Ukrainians I know, and I know a lot of Ukrainians, have a lot of Ukrainian friends. You can say I'm biased. I don't want anybody to suffer. I don't want Russian Russians to suffer. I don't want Ukrainians to suffer, but I am biased when it comes to this war that I am pro-Ukraine. So we'll just make that clear, okay? But I am, I have had plenty of conversations with Ukrainians, obviously right now, very upset, very worried about the specter of not getting U.S. support with regard to what's going on in Ukraine now. And the Ukrainians, they're having a hard time getting pushed back in a lot of areas. We're going to talk about that when we go through the maps. But what I do tend to hear, and you see it in the Western press, and even last week, maybe the way I explained it maybe sounded a little bit too one-sided. It's like blame it on the Republicans, okay? That is actually not what I meant to say, and I don't think it's the truth. Now, there will be some pro-Democrats out there who say, yes, it's the Republicans. Just like there are Republicans who are saying, oh, Biden, Hillary, whatever. Tell you the truth, I'm not really for any party. I think that you have to have the attitude of, like Treebeard. I'm not on anybody's side because they're not on my side. To be honest, if you are a sincere journalist, to be honest, I don't even know if you should vote. You don't want to take a side when it comes to political parties. But if you are just a voter, really, we got to get to the end of partisan voting, that I'm a Republican, I vote Republican, and I hate those guys. I'm a Democrat, I hate those other guys. I'm for the SNS, I hate the opposition in Serbia, or I'm KO, so I hate peace, or I'm peace. We got to get past that. If you're a voter, you need to look and say, do these politicians represent what I want, what I think is right, and are they stealing? If they don't represent what I want and what I believe I need, I don't want to vote for them. If they're stealing, I don't want to vote for them. It's pretty straightforward. Now, when things get confusing and completely messy, that's when the political parties need to start wondering, what hill am I going to die on? And to tell you the truth, I see the Republicans dying on one hill, and I see the Democrats dying or about to die on another hill. This is what I think our Ukrainian friends don't understand, is why the money, how this has suddenly been tied to the border situation in the U.S. Oh, it's the bad Republicans, and why that's not really completely true. And yeah, I'm going to point to Hunter. You know which Hunter I'm talking about. Hunter Biden. Now, I am not saying that Hunter Biden doesn't want the Ukrainians to have money to defend themselves. I'm not saying Joe Biden doesn't want that. But what happened last week, especially, well, a couple things happened, but one thing that happened is that you had congressional Democrats coming out and saying, you guys, the whole Biden, Burisma, Hunter Biden controversies and influence and bribery and all, that's all conspiracy theory, and we should be talking about Ukraine, and Ukraine should get money. In the meantime, the Republicans, they don't like to hear things like that. They blow up. They're absolutely committed to trying to go after Hunter Biden and his father, Joe Biden, for all kinds of things that at least do smell. They don't look ideal. So they blow up. And so they don't want to hear about money for Ukraine because some of these issues are tied to Ukraine. And it just keeps getting more and more severe. Now, I'm going to get into just a little bit of this, but one thing that also happened, right? One thing that also happened is we saw Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky travel to the U.S. in kind of a desperate plea to go meet with Republicans and say, look, we need to get this aid moving. We need your help. He said very clearly, we are going to keep fighting. We're not giving up, but we need your aid. Now, some of the Republican comments back, I'm gonna quote J.D. Vance, Republican from Ohio. The idea of flying this guy in last minute effectively to badger and guilt trip us, I just find grotesque. This is purely designed to apply pressure on Republicans to give up their fight on the border and write another blank check to Ukraine. That's what he told Fox News. I'm not doing it. And then another senator, another Republican, Roger Marshall from Kansas, he's been invited here by Joe Biden to come do the president's bidding. This is the kind of stuff that came out. Now, some Republicans actually come out and said, look, after we get the border situation fixed, you're going to find that these Republicans are going to be behind supporting Ukraine. And what they're just, some of you in Europe maybe you don't know, but we have had just a flood of illegal immigrants across the southern border into Texas, where I'm from, and that has not gone over well with the Republicans, with a lot of people actually. There are actually Democrats that are very upset about this now. And when Biden came out, he wanted to create a package for Ukraine that's going to be like $61 billion in the end. He wanted to sweeten this deal by saying, we will also do something about the border to the tune of, and I might be wrong here because I'm getting old, I think it was 16 million of that would go to the border. The Republicans said, no, that's not enough. You got to get serious about the border. No way we're giving anything to Ukraine unless you get serious about the border. Now, that already is tough. That's tough. But in the background, we have the whole Hunter Biden Burisma mess. Now, what I'm not going to do is try to go through all this stuff and try to prove it one way or another. I am going to put a couple of links, though. You got a link. You've got, well, I'm going to skip that. I'm actually, okay, well, you got a few links to articles that I'm going to put up, including a political article, which talks about some of the inconsistencies in the Hunter Biden story, and also an NBC article, which talks about some of the problems that are coming up. Some of this stuff is very, very problematic. But this comes on the back of a number of things that happened when it came to Hunter Biden. One was that he just decided he wasn't going to go and participate in a Republican inquiry. He just refused to show up, and now they're probably going to hold him in contempt. Instead, he held a press conference where he basically said Republicans have weaponized, this is in the Hill, weaponized my dad's love for me. He basically said, look, I'm not perfect. I've had a lot of problems, but these are my problems. They don't have anything to do with my dad. The problem is that the Republicans don't believe this. I know that there'll be Democrats out there that say this is all conspiracy theory. But he said that, Hunter Biden said he's got to stay sober and he wants to protect his dad. He said the allegations against his dad, that his dad may have benefited or that he used his dad's name and took money, saying that he would have influence, et cetera, et cetera. None of this is true. Again, I'm going to put up a couple of links. You could read those yourself, decide what you think about it. I will say that the press has not done anyone any favors on this, and this is also for the Ukrainians to understand. When it came to the infamous Hunter Biden laptop, right? We were told it's a conspiracy, it's not real, it's not, It turned out, no, it's actually real. In fact, these very news sites, in the New York Times, of Politico, like I just said, they're citing information. They're pointing to the laptop. They're pointing to saying that the FBI kind of didn't want to investigate the laptop when they had it. The laptop has become a big deal. The meeting at the Milano Cafe, did it happen or didn't it happen? Well, suddenly now maybe it kind of happened. Even some of the statements that have come out from the Biden administration. At first, no, man, we never talked business. I didn't have anything to do with my son. And then suddenly it becomes, well, I was never in the business. Or actually, I don't think President Biden actually said anything like in first person, but the spokesman said he was never in the business. So suddenly it's like, maybe he did hear about it a little. Maybe they did talk about it. This kind of waffling is a worry. Now, again, we get back to what hill do you want to die on? Now, the Republicans, and this is a problem for Ukraine when it comes to money in the future, and the future is very, very near. The Republicans tend to be, they want to, I guess, die on the Trump hill, with Trump being another candidate and maybe being the Republican right there. He's going to run and try to become president again. We've seen all the things that came out of that. Pretty messy. I'm surprised the Republicans want to die on that hill, and I'm surprised that the Republicans don't want to kind of remember the past, Ronald Reagan, Cold War, Russia maybe is not our friend. That was kind of the tradition, but okay, if they want, Trump wants to change that, but I'm surprised they want to die on that hill. But then the Democrats apparently want to die on the Hunter Biden hill. And the Hunter Biden hill just looks more and more tenuous. And I'll give you just some advice when it comes to like being an investigator. You know, when you got a witness to something or the accused or whatever, if he has a history of hard drugs and admits to these things, that's not the guy, that's not the hill you want to die on. Just giving you that advice. Now, without saying who is right, who is wrong, that's what these investigations are for. Again, you have links, you can read this stuff yourself. I'll put it in there. I do want to bring up one other thing, though, and that is the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. And I don't understand why it's not brought up at all. The Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, this goes back quite a long way, and the intention was what, is what it sounds like. It was, we did not want Americans to be going abroad bribing officials all over the place to get business deals, right? And then that was expanded. We don't want Americans to own companies and just the board members are going and doing the bribery for us so that we can expand our business interests. Now, this is a little bit controversial because the problem is that American companies compete with companies from other nations, you might guess who they are, who have no problem with bribing. And then, it's hard for American companies to compete in tenders. They don't win. Officials, local, Africa, not just Africa, Central Europe, had a huge problem with this forever, although now the anti-corruption units in different countries are far more aggressive than they used to be. But it used to be seriously, when we had the big privatization years, hands were coming out all over the place. I mean, I remember getting a query, a client, he didn't want me or the company I was at to investigate anyone per se, but there were so many hands coming out, they just wanted us to tell them who all these people were. Like these different politicians, civil servants. They just said, we don't even know who all these people are. They're contacting us and everybody wants a bribe. That was years ago. I'm not going to say which country that was in, but things like that did happen. But back to the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act. A couple of things are really important with that. One is, if you are a board member, for example, of a company that is linked to bribery or just committing bribery, yeah, you can get in a lot of trouble. And the fines are crazy. They can be incredibly high. One of the largest that I remember off the top of my head was when Siemens got busted, and when you counted the base fine of 800 million, then plus some other fines that they got in there, it was like $1.5 billion by the time they were done. And the U.S. was trying to go after some of their officials. They were trying to go after them and trying to prosecute them, because you can get prosecuted for a criminal offense under that too. Now Siemens guys, don't get mad at me. That's old history, whatever, and just brought you up because, hey, you were pretty high on the list for a while there. But they're not the biggest anymore. They're when you get into the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act list of fines, that's not the biggest now. There's some even bigger ones. But when we get into what the penalty can be for you as a physical person, yeah, you can do time. Your companies can pay huge fines. Everybody can get in trouble, which leads me to, why isn't any of this brought up? Not that I really wish, I don't know, Hunter Biden, I don't know. I'm just saying that I'm surprised that none of this ever enters the conversation. Because when you have the history of Burisma in Ukraine, right, things get pretty sticky. Now, first of all, you take a look at who is on the board. Well, without naming names, last names, because I don't need to, let's just get sued for some trivial stuff. There's a guy, Mykola Z. Mykola Z, he was Minister of Natural Resources under Viktor Yanukovych. Remember the guy that was president until Maidan happened in Ukraine. He was also, I think he was actually head of Secret Services there for some, I may be wrong on that. But anyway, he was a serious politician there. You had probably the beneficial owner, again, UBO, possibly was a guy named Ihor K. Ihor K was like a big-time oligarch in Ukraine. They went after him for illegally privatizing a bank there. You had a certain president of a country that I'm very fond of that was very, very controversial, also on the board. I'm actually not going to name that. I'm going to be a chicken today. You had this whole board of you could say very controversial people. And then you had other people that showed up on the board, started showing up on the board. And these included a guy Joseph C.B., right? Joseph C.B., he was the former director of the Counterterrorism Center of the Central Intelligence Agency under George Bush. Then you had Karina Z., who was the wife of Mikola, who we just mentioned. But you also had Devin A., who was a former senior advisor to John Kerry. Man, these guys didn't care what party they're from. That's what I was saying. Don't worry about the party. Just look at what's going on. And then you had Hunter, who showed up, and I think Hunter, these guys showed up. But the funny thing is that Hunter, he winds up on the board in 2014. Devin A., he splits, but along the way, Burisma starts having a lot of problems. Now, what kind of problems did they have? Well, they start getting investigated for bribery many times over. You had the whole blow up, which was ruled conspiracy theory when you had that, Joe Biden bragged that he was going to get a prosecutor fired, and that's how this whole Burisma came, and they were saying that's all conspiracy, none of it's true, and now we're going, oh, well, I don't know. That the Republicans are at least trying to drag this stuff up again. Without getting further into those details and getting everybody mad at me on all sides, typically, and I've seen this myself when it comes to other companies, other Americans, not even just Americans, Germans, Hungarians, whatever. If you are involved in a company as a board member, and suddenly that company comes under investigation for bribery, right, and is tied to politically questionable people, PQPs, it's actually not what we usually say, but anyway, if you get into persons that actually have come up on the radar of possibly doing bad things like bribery or worse, usually the feds, the FCPA investigators are very game to investigate you, and even kind of the way it's always worked is you get investigated, hit with massive fines, and you end up kind of having to prove your innocence to get out of that kind of trouble, right? Very, very difficult. For the typical citizen who's not a big-time politician, who doesn't have the name or whatever, it would seem that the FCPA question would be almost a redundant question. It's just, you're going to have a lot of problems. Somehow, it's never even brought up here. I just find that curious. I'm not even saying there's a conspiracy. It's like it seems the Republicans don't bring it up. The Democrats don't bring it up. Nobody seems to be worried about it. Maybe there's some crazy loophole that I've never come across. I don't know what that would be if you have a company that's gotten in that much trouble and you've got guys that were linked to the Yanukovych regime, which was, before Maidan, and then he split, that was Russia line. Now it's not. Now we have a war going on, and you've got Igor K. and all these kind of, I don't know. What do I say? But to make a very long story short, when it comes to the combination of the Republicans ticked off about Ukraine in general, ticked off about Burisma in general, ticked off about the entire border situation, the Democrats not really making the right decision if they really want money to go to Ukraine, to try to say, forget Hunter and forget all these other things that are floating forward, like the laptop and things that you can confirm, and say, this is all complete fantasy. We should focus on Ukraine. That's not the way to get money to Ukraine. So I may have mystified you even further, but if you're in Ukraine and you're wondering what the holdup is in the U.S., it's just chaos. It's just complete freaking chaos. That's what it really comes down to. And I wouldn't say one party's better than the other. It's just a mess. But now, this is what we're going to do. That's enough talking about these things and U.S. politics. What I want to do is get into the maps. We're going to talk about what's going on right now on the ground. Is it pretty? No, it's not pretty. It's just not pretty. And it's actually very worrying when I think about it, when even the Republicans that say once we get past this border issue, we can get past some of this noise and start getting the money flowing again. But that's going to be difficult to do for sure by the end of this year. And every delay is an issue. Now, right before we get into the maps, there's one other thing that I will bring up. I'm going to put this link also up. You can probably see the title here. This was an article that actually came out of the Ukrainian press, English-speaking language press, and they brought up something that's a worry. And I brought this up a few times in the past, and that is that the Ukrainians were on the offensive, but when you looked, especially, say, when you went up north towards Svatove, Kupiansk, and all that, you just didn't see entrenchments on the Ukrainian side. You don't really see entrenchments on the Ukrainian side, even in the southern area. It was all focused on the offensive. Now we've got the Russians' big counteroffensive, and as we understand it, the Ukrainians are trying to dig in. Very, very difficult. This has me worried. That's a remarkable article, though, which, you know, is something. I'm not trying to be anti, you know, I'm not supporting the Ukrainians war. I'm just saying a remarkable article, and I'm going to put that in the links too. But now let's go to the maps, and as part of the third thing. Now, as we always do, we take a look at the big map. You've seen it before if you ever watched the show. You've got Kherson all the way down. You go to Zaporizhia. You're going to go all the way up. We're going to you can see where you get into the Avdiivka and the Bakhmut fronts, and go all the way up to Kupiansk, that crescent. Just so you know where we are. Now, we're going to start in Kherson. So we turn to the Kherson map. Not a lot to tell you here. For the last couple of weeks, we were still kind of crossing our fingers. The weather has, just in Ukraine, has gotten tougher. We had snowstorms, we had a lot tougher weather, but then you also had the Russian bloggers bragging about how they have slowed down what is happening at Krinky. So if you look at this map, you see Kherson, you see that one little arrow, just like I told you last week. That's where Krinky is, and that's where the Ukrainians had crossed over. Here's the Krinky map, and they'd gotten themselves into, not so much into Krinky, but into the woods that are actually to the west of Krinky once they crossed the river. The Russians, we know, were throwing everything they could at them to get them out, because in this war, you find that once towns are taken, the towns are obliterated, and they're so flattened that that troops can't be in the towns. Especially now because of the drones and everything are just hovering, and they're getting more accurate, they're not even just dropping grenades on guys' heads, they're suicide drones going down and flitting in and hitting guys. But it seems now that more and more what can protect troops and get in, and you can embed and get in there and actually fight. It's not trenches as much as it is just forest. It's hard to knock down forest, and Ukraine's wet enough that you just can't burn the forest. Now we know the Russians have been doing everything they can to get the Ukrainians out, and the Ukrainians have still been transporting troops across the river. Now the bloggers last week, the Russian bloggers, went off talking about how they hit Ukrainian troops crossing the river and annihilated them. I actually checked a few different sources, and I never really saw how many Ukrainian troops were killed. It actually were casualties. I won't even say killed. The numbers probably were pretty low because the Ukrainians are pretty smart with that. But there were no signs on the flip side that the Ukrainians are making actual progress at this time anymore. Although there is talk, supposedly Zelensky's talking about another offensive, etc. For now, right now, it's not offensive time, it's dig-in time. And that's also kind of coming from the Ukrainian general staff. Now, if we jump to the next map, we're getting into Zaporizhia, Orkiv sector, and Robotnia. You guys have seen this map a lot of times. What is different there's a few things different about this map now, though. This first map, you see Robotnia, you see way down below Tokmak. That was the goal. We talked about it. We thought there might be a breakthrough at Verbovi, and then we thought they might go straight down south of Robotnia and take Novoprokopivka. Unfortunately, things now seem to be reversing a bit. If you can see on this first map, the arrows where the Russians are basically an offensive is ongoing. The Russians are starting to put pressure. If we go to the second map, this is kind of troubling. You see if you go down to Novoprokopivka, you see the Russians pushing to the north, pushing back. So that seems to be stalled, and the Ukrainians are on the defensive. They're also hitting Robotny from the west, and that was always kind of a weak spot of this part of the offensive in Robotny, because that's where the Ukrainians were supplying their guys to try to get guys and equipment down to attack Novoprokopivka. But the problem is, as I pointed out many times, that they need to push farther west and take more land, and they weren't able to do that. Now, something else that is happening, which is much more, it's kind of depressing. You see Verbove, and you see now, you can tell by where the gray area is that progress into Verbove that we used to have, where the Ukrainians held that, and they had the possibility of maybe going straight into Verbove or cutting back to the south. Well, now that seems to be in Russian hands, and the Russians are pushing further north of Verbove, and supposedly they're also pushing hard at Novopokrovka, which is even further north. So it looks like the Ukrainians are back on the defensive, which is not hard to understand because apparently they're just limited when it comes to ammunition at this point. Now, Staromayorsk. You guys may remember Staromayorsk. We got excited about that maybe 2 months ago. There hasn't been a lot of noise there. You can see that you can tell by where the Russians are in Zavitny Bazhanya that the Ukrainians, they're not there. They've lost a bit there, and also you can see the Russians to the west are pushing hard, and the Ukrainians look like they're back on their heels, unfortunately, there. Now, if we go north, kind of to northeast of Staromorovka, you got Vuhledar. Not much seems to be happening there, but if we go further on this next map, you'll see Marinka. Marinka, most of it seems to have fallen into Russian hands, and the Russians are pushing very hard there. Also at Staromikhailivka to the north, and then, of course, at Avdiivka, which is further north. I'm just bringing that up because Marinka, forever, I would gloss over it because there were back and forth fights, but it was pretty stable. It didn't seem to me that the Ukrainians would get pushed out of there, but it's from what we're hearing, it's pretty rough and some vicious fighting there and at Staromikhailivka. Now let's go up to Avdiivka. Actually, we'll jump up to Avdiivka. And you can see just by the number of arrows, man, the Russians are throwing everything they can at Avdiivka. Now, we've heard various reports and various sportsmen in the press where over the past few months, the Russians easily may have lost 13,000 or more dead. I even saw 18,000. I don't know if that's true, but huge numbers. And then there were reports that 20 to 30,000 new conscripts have been poured into Avdiivka. I understood up kind of to the north, up where you see Krasnohorivka, up there to try to take Berdichi, and also the little town up there that we've spoken about in the past, Stepove. Now, where we are seeing the Russians make progress, well, they're throwing so many troops in that they are making some progress, and that is in the north where Krasnohorivka is. They haven't actually taken Berdichi or Svatovo yet. We'll get to that in a minute. But in the south, you see them at Vodnyane, but also further south of that, like where Nevelsky is. Lot of pressure down here, and this has kind of become the new Bakhmut when it comes to just like for both sides, just horrific fighting. And although I was very pessimistic even 2 weeks ago that the Ukrainians will get their supply lines cut off, they're still holding fast. If we take a closer look at that northern part of the Avdiivka battle, where you've got Krasnohorivka and you've got Stepove and Berdichi, you see that they still have not taken Stepove, but this is where I'm worried. They're pushing hard to the east and south of Stepove, and they're also pushing hard to the north of Stepove and Berdichi, and also even further north. A lot of pressure. Now, we're hearing the Ukrainians are pumping in reinforcements there because they don't want to lose these, they don't want to lose Stepove and Berdichi because then they're going to have a terrible time actually reinforcing their troops that are down deeper in Avdiivka. And if you take a look at this next map, you can really see that. You can just basically see that kind of, you can kind of imagine that reinforcement line, although they've already put so much pressure on Stepove that it's almost hard to imagine. But that's actually really a little bit further south, and then you go down into Avdiivka, but the Russians are also pushing hard straight into the industrial zone down in Avdiivka. Here's one more close-up where you can see just how much pressure that they've put on Stepove, especially. Remember that when we get into these open fields, man, we're in the world of drones, right? So if it's not forests, if these are farm fields, it gets very difficult for guys to get reinforcements in and out for both sides. For both sides, although the number of Russian drones to Ukrainian drones, you hear sometimes you hear it's 3-to-1, sometimes you hear it's 8-to-1. Hard to get real figures on that too, but there's no doubt that something is always buzzing in the air above. Now, if we go further north to Bakhmut, not going to say a lot about this, but unfortunately it looks like the Ukrainians have lost some of their gains. You can see, you remember when we were talking about the gains at Andriivka and Klishchiivka? Well, the Russians are pushing very, very hard north of Klishchiivka, and those gains basically, if you're going to try to measure it out in square meters or square miles, they've kind of been lost. The same thing, the Russians are pushing also further north in Bakhmut. The Russians have decided, and it's kind of very clear, they're going to throw everything they can into this now that the winter is coming and the Ukrainians are not getting the aid, to try probably to dismay, to convince the Republicans or the U.S. in general that this is futile, or the Europeans too. The Europeans are kind of coming up talking about more money. The Germans, they seem to be more committed than I remember even in the past. But these are very tough times. Now we're going to go back, we're going to go further north to skip Svatove. Not much is happening there. We're going to go further north up to Kupiansk. Same kind of thing. It looks kind of the same as always, except now is a little different. We know there's very fierce fighting coming out down from Liman Pershi towards Sinkivka and Kupiansk, which actually you can see also on this map. But also, if you go further down to where Yahidny is, and also even Kishlivka, there are reports of very fierce fighting there. If we jump up to Liman Pershi and you see Sinkivka, you can see by that gray area that the Russians have pushed forward, or at least that's maybe disputed, but that gray area has moved further into Sinkivka. Not seeing the Russians making a lot of progress there, but the fighting is fierce. The fighting is fierce, and really not getting any clarity on the number of Russian troops in that area. There was a huge buildup months ago. Some of that was diverted. Some of that was replaced by conscripts that maybe didn't know what they're doing. But what we are convinced is that right now Putin, they see this as the time to try to really hit Ukraine, especially during this kind of impasse in Congress. Now, getting back to what I mentioned in that headline, I'll put it up here again. Getting back to what I mentioned is that the Ukrainians, now they're trying to dig in. I'm hoping it's not too late. When I saw that article, it kind of freaked me out because it was something that I worried about in the past, like especially when we went way back to Svatove, when it seemed there was a Russian buildup there. We're like, man, if they cross in there and they could go for Borova, they could go very deep, because the Ukrainians don't have these dug-in trenches. They don't have anything like the Russian Surovikin line. But it is what it is, and we will just hope and pray and for these guys in the field, because these are tough times. So here I am again. I'm back, and we are ready now after the gloom and doom. And I hope it's not too gloom and doomy, because really pulling for you guys in Ukraine, and hang in there. Very tough going into Christmas right now, I know. But we're going to move on to the third thing and have an interview with an expat entrepreneur, businessman, kind of a veteran of all kinds of things in Poland, Central Europe, John Gabrovic. So stick around, because we're going to be right back. Now we're back with the third thing. As I always say, this isn't a thing, this isn't an interview. And I want to introduce to you guys, if you don't know him, John Gabrovic, longtime expat businessman, sort of seen it all here. He's one of the guys, I've been in Poland a long time, but I've only been in Warsaw since '97.
Okay.
You were here even before
92. Well, Krakow 92, but Warsaw 94.
94. So you've been here ahead of me, right?
Yeah.
And he's one of the guys that, if we talk about the old days, you guys already know if you're watching the vlog, I've got some crazy stories. He's got some crazy stories. But before we get into that, because we want to talk about the cops today, and you've even had some very recent
Yes.
things that happened.
Yes.
Not that he's done anything wrong.
Yes.
I may have a couple of guys come on that did do things in the past. Very interesting. Talk about how they did scams. One of them's considering. That's going to be great. We might have to black out his face. But no, not John. But what I do want to talk about very, very quickly is just in Central Europe. This is we're in Poland especially, but not even just in Poland, but in Poland we now have a changing of the guard when it comes to politics. You've been in business here for a long time. We'll talk a little bit about what you do. But we also have a kind of a little bit of a bizarre situation somewhat in the sense that even on a Warsaw level, I see a lot of stores shut down, or I know people have suffered because there was COVID and there was a lot of difficulties, but at the same time, real estate prices for residential are just astronomical and just going up. Part of that's because of the governments. The past one, this one. But what's your opinion on that, very quickly, before we get into the police stuff? Yeah.
I think that, God, it could take, how do you do this quickly? I think that generally the Polish economy is on the right path.
Yeah.
I think that we're going to be going through a really, really nasty 6 months with the fact that the minimum wage has shot up to levels that are unsustainable.
Yeah.
From a real estate standpoint, you actually have 4 mixed-use projects in the city that are sucking up a lot of the, I'm in the restaurant industry, a lot of the money that's spent on entertainment and food.
Right.
Whereas you have the others, the Hoja.
So basically people paying rent, paying the high rents, and maybe going to pay even higher rents now. Now there is subsidies for these loans, though, from the government still.
So I think that over the next 6 months, there's going to be massive, massive turmoil. And I even wrote an article on LinkedIn about how there may be a tsunami coming, at least within the restaurant community, over the next 3 to 6 months, just because.
Well, it's funny you say that because I have to travel around a lot. I've been in Gdansk a couple of times recently. I've been here, and in some restaurants, as always, there are some that are always going to be rocking. When I went to yours, it was rocking. It was doing really well. But then you do. I was in I'm not going to name the name, but I was in a very good Indian restaurant that was always full for years. And they even said, we're busy right now on Saturday nights.
Yeah.
And the rest of the week, we just don't have money.
It's because the Polish consumer acts a bit like the German consumer, very conservative with their money, which is a smart thing.
So when they feel things coming, they shut it down.
They started shutting it down, and I have a good friend who's actually in the retail industry across all of Europe. Poland is #1 with discounting, and the positive effect of discounting, so that the promotions are working, which means that people are being driven to discounts. And so what our read is that the consumer accepted the price increases of inflation up till about 3 months ago, and then the consumer just said, "Basta, that's it. We can't take anymore."
I wish my household was a bit more like this. I don't think that we rein in our spending when things happen like this, but so I can see that.
And at the same time, when most companies are going to now have to spend 20 to 30% more for their labor come January, and that labor is not going to be 20%, 30% more productive.
Right.
And then there's price cap. We just can't raise prices anymore. So there's a big squeeze on margins.
Right. Interesting. Well, that is not good. I promised in the third thing we were going to talk about some more stuff that's a little bit more fun or optimistic, but really not, because I didn't expect this. One of the reasons why I wanted to have John over is because, like I said, he's sort of seen a lot, been through it all, dealt with some of the craziness, especially in the pre-EU days in the 90s and stuff in Poland. But even just now, the reality hit home. Poland, Central Europe is just like the rest of the world. There's still crime and there's still things that happen. You just came from the police station.
Yes. Yes, and I apologize for being late. But
no worries.
What happened is, and actually, if I could start with something very positive, we ran businesses in the 1990s that included nightclubs and restaurants at a time when the bad guys did exist, and yet I felt, our family felt, because we were starting a family at the time, safer in Poland, even though there was craziness going on, than than any other place.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, we did not have that many issues at all, given this that we were operating a nightclub in Warsaw in '93 to 2002.
That's a good point. That's a good. I can see that.
Very safe.
I was doing investigative journalism and that kind of stuff, so I kind of was in that muck. So I don't know if I really felt that way, but I can see that.
To be clear, sure, theft was everywhere at the time, but it was violent crime. You didn't see much of that except for bad people doing stuff to bad people, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
Whereas what happened last night was a family member was waiting for an Uber outside of a club and just got jumped by 4 guys and got beat up pretty badly. And so now we're dealing with...
He was robbed.
Robbed, yes. Phone and the wallet, but this person's a fighter, and so he gave back somebody what he got, but he got beat up pretty badly. So he's at the hospital now.
That's not, unfortunately, and I think that this is just if you're going around Western Europe, this kind of thing doesn't surprise you, right? Like if you're in France, Belgium, whatever, Italy, things happen, right? Poland kind of went through a weird phase where after the mafia days and then the EU, and to be honest, I give credit to Law and Justice because they put like a jillion cops on the streets. Because remember, there were no cops for a long time. There were just no police.
Right.
And then things became much safer. But I think that lull, now we're sort of catching up slowly with Western Europe, and just things happen, on the street, especially late at night.
And the first accusation was it was a group of Ukrainians, and my son said no, it was Poles. It was Poles.
Yeah, and that people jump to conclusions. Yeah,
could be unfortunate.
And so this kind of gets back to my point, because you had also a crazy experience when you were misidentified years ago.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so let's talk about that. But then I also want to talk about hold off on that a second. A lot of even my clients or people I deal with, they have never been to the police station.
Okay.
They don't know what it's like. My wife tells me that I think what I think is normal is not normal, because these things don't. I mean, I just go in and out. I'm used to it, right? But what was your experience there? Because I think a lot of viewers who've never been there, maybe one day they'll need to go. Something gets stolen.
Sure.
One day maybe they do something and get arrested. I don't know. But what was your experience there now in modern Poland, 2023?
Should I name the street where we went to?
No, you don't have to.
Okay, so it was kind of as you expect. For some reason, I don't know why, there were no lights on in the place except for the gentleman was working.
That has not changed at all.
We had to wait about an hour and a half for a policeman, because there were no policemen that were available at the time.
Right.
He was supposed to be only 30, 45 minutes, but it took about an hour and a half. That's why I was late.
Yeah.
But look, I got to admit that they're doing their job. Right.
Yeah.
I was at this particular station many times back when we had the club, and it was much more active. It was a Sunday, and most of the people were just there with stolen items. And then there was another gentleman who the same thing happened to him. He showed up right before I was getting ready to leave. And where my family member's phone was supposed to be, this particular guy also got attacked.
So it looks like the gang went just from one place to another,
Exactly.
and it was hitting people, right?
Yeah.
Well, I tell you very quickly, interrupt there, I was amazed by this. You've already, no credit card, blocked the credit cards, all that stuff done. Right, okay.
And by the way, which I did not know, just for information, is that when you call the bank can actually can't stop your ID working as well, which is important, because sometimes they can have a card and they can use the ID, so the ID is also blocked. So the bank can actually do that. You don't have to worry about having to stop that.
That's actually, I don't want to lie, but that's relatively new, because not even very long ago, you would try to get in touch with the bank, especially with business interests, and they would say, we're not doing anything until you show the police report. And that delay was a big problem. Of course, you would call the credit card company, but if it was a banking issue, that was a different type of issue. Now that's changed, the banks are hit with so many scammers. Like if you get on the bank line, you'll notice that if you call a bank here and they'll say, which button do you want? One of the first things they'll say is, have you been a victim of scammers? That's one of the options. If you call the bank, almost any bank now, because there's so much going on. But years ago, years and years ago, this would have been 94 or 5, whenever Kentucky Fried Chicken first showed up. right?
Okay.
At Platz Bankovi. I'm going to say that. I went in there and I was ordering and I paid and I put my wallet in my jacket and somebody bumped me. And I didn't think about it. And I carried my thing and then it's gone. And I dropped my stuff and I ran back to the office, which wasn't very far. And by the time I got there, and it took about 45 minutes to get to the right, I called the US at the time to stop the bank thing. They'd already gotten money off it. They hadn't gotten money. They'd used it in stores that quickly. So, and that was back then. Right, so you do have to act quickly on that. But now you're in there, and they took your police report, and
well, to make sure I'm not too late, I had to leave, so I don't know.
You don't know the end of it.
I don't know the end of it.
Yeah, right.
So,
but still, the professional.
Yes.
Very.
Yeah, and thorough. Very thorough as well.
Yeah.
There were cameras in the area where he got hit, so.
So they may catch these guys on. It's I try to give a boost to the cops when I can because I see them actually catch a lot more people than people assume. Getting goods back, that's pretty tough.
Writing off.
Tough, right?
Writing off.
But if there's a group that's hitting different people, especially multiple people in an area or stealing cars, whatever, it's surprising how often they make busts and they follow through on it. Although, just like police anywhere, they're inundated. But now what I want to do is shift back into retro land.
Okay.
And there's a reason for this, too. You were detained wrongly.
Yes.
In a crazy, I want you to tell that story. And then I'll say why. That's all right. You can tell it in whatever version you want. And then I'll say why I want. And again, I'm a little bit coming to the defense of the police on this, but not completely, because those times were actually pretty crazy.
Yes.
To tell you the truth. But okay, go ahead.
There were some connections here in the story that were a bit asinine. So, and to be fair, we had an incident that occurred within our group of investors and companies. I don't want to get too much in detail that one as well, where it involved the CBA,
the anti-corruption.
Yes, and the U.S. Embassy, because it was a situation that was involving some of our businesses, and it was done extremely professionally. Okay,
that somebody who actually was ripping you guys off, or was
there was some. I really don't want to get into because this particular person went to jail for many years, psychological issues, and so that's why I really don't want to activate anything.
Sure.
But the point, long and short, on that one was amazingly professional.
Right. That
was handled, but it got to a point where my wife and I were escorted to a safe house when things were going down, and so it was handled very well, and then also the courts. Back then, also a bit odd, but also everything seemed to be processed properly and fairly.
I think that, one of the reasons why we have a new political party running the government now is because the courts were jammed up. Those different reforms did not speed anything up. Yeah. We'll put it that way. But okay, go ahead and tell us the strap.
Just kind of set the stage. We owned a few restaurants in the city.
Yeah.
And there was a period of time when I'm not the best at actually answering the Vezvanya that you get in the... Just getting random stuff that would come in, because we had a lot of different business at the time, and there was a government that's always wanted something. Usually the Vezvanya was because there was some VAT invoice or something.
You got to clear up a tax issue.
Exactly. And so I would hand the stuff off to someone else just to handle. Well, it wasn't until I got the third one when my wife actually said, this seems to be like from the police. You need to show up.
This is not just
and it was the third one, and the letter was actually quite aggressive in that you have to show up, right?
Yeah.
So it was I think it was an August afternoon. I think it was like around lunchtime. So I showed up at the police station, and it said in there I was supposed to show it with my passport.
Right.
Which I felt a bit weird. Yeah. So I showed up at the police station on Solidarnosti, and it was like right after lunchtime, and they were surprised that I actually was there because they didn't expect me to show up. Because
they thought you're on the run.
Right. And then because they also had I was Samoldovana registered in some other address where I wasn't living at this particular time. Right. So they took my passport and then come back 20 minutes, and then they first alert me that, by the way, the U.S. Embassy has been informed that we've detained you.
Right.
And we're going to be taking you to a city outside of Warsaw.
And you had no idea why?
No idea why. Oh, just to be clear, I was living in Poland for 10 years. We had businesses. I was gone for 8.
Right.
So this is when we had arrived back in.
You'd come back and
Right.
suddenly.
For about 6 months, I was back in the country.
Right.
Okay. So that was the other one. What could they? I've only been here.
What could you have done?
What could I have done? Right. And so this is where the story starts demonstrating a little bit of incompetence.
Right.
I told them, I said, look, guys, our children were very young at the time, and I said, well, I have one key. I have the key because my wife and I work together. I said, I need to give her the key because she'll not be able to get into the house this afternoon. My kids are going to be there. Can we at least go to the office and I can hand the key to my wife?
Right.
It took 45 minutes to get the approval to actually do that.
Right.
It's not too crazy.
Yeah.
And so then I gave them the address that we were going to go to, and we're in the city center. The office is in the city center, about 5 minutes away, and these guys are going across the river.
Right.
And then I'm telling them, guys, that's not where. They also took my phone, so I couldn't make any phone calls. And they didn't believe me. So we ended up like 30 minutes outside the city in Prague. We got to the address.
They didn't believe what?
They didn't believe me that I said, you guys have the wrong address. This is 2010, right? So I don't know if the GPS system's working. I can't even remember how well they were. And so we got there. It was some rural, just trees that were there. So I said, now you're going to trust me? So now they actually took another 45 minutes.
So when you told them the address to your house, they went to the wrong place.
To the office.
To the office
to give my wife the keys.
Right. Right.
So this is a point in time where they're already not trusting me, and I'm trying to help them, but I realized just go along with it and not cause problems. So then we get to the office. I happen to end up so these guys who were the policemen were undercover, so dressed normally. They come into the office, they're dressed very normally, not like they're supposed to be in an office. This is still when people are wearing suits in the office at the time. I get in there and people are the front desk are looking at me like, what the hell's going on?
Right.
There are two hoodlums that are there, and almost like someone that would have a gun to my head. And I thought, I need to find my wife to give the keys to. The company attorney happened to be walking by right then. She goes, what the hell's going on? It's like, I don't know, can you help me? And so she had the conversation with these guys, and the guys repeated it. We've taken the passport, we've informed the embassy, we're taking him for questioning.
Right.
And she said, there's nothing we can do. So of course, wife is alarmed, everyone in the office is alarmed. I'm not feeling very comfortable about this.
Yeah.
So then, getting to the funny part of this. So now we've already lost 2.5 hours since I actually showed up at the police station just on this journey. And we're heading south.
Right.
This is when it was very difficult to get outside the city. We're in like ration and stuff. I get hungry. And it's probably 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock. And so I say, guys, can we pull over to McDonald's? I'll buy you lunch because or it was dinner at the time. I'm really hungry. So that was a negotiation. They had to call whether or not I could
whether
actually
they could do that.
Yeah, whether they can do that. So long story short here is that
you bought them Big Macs.
Yes, we did. And I was happy to have a meal then. So then I see that we're approaching Częstochowa.
Right.
Because I've been on that road quite a bit. And so we make it to Częstochowa.
So, and you still don't have any idea why you've been detained. Yeah. And they're driving you to Częstochowa.
Yes. And we get there, and by now I'm guessing it's around 7, 8 o'clock, maybe.
Yeah.
Maybe 9 o'clock, 7, 8. So, and I had to wait an hour and a half for the guy to come. Who was going to be doing all the questioning. So by then, I think it was around 10 o'clock when he actually started asking me questions. All right. So I'm in one of those old wood paneled rooms.
Right.
Big table, lots of folders on the table. And so he comes in. First of all, he's really pissed that it took so long to actually get me there.
You guys had to stop at McDonald's.
Right. Well, no, because they said the Vezvanya all the time. Evidently,
for the whole thing,
I was key to his case. Okay? My testimony was key to this big case that they've been evidently working on for a very long time. Okay?
Right. So they wanted you as a witness, is what it was.
Yes, that was why they wanted. Yes, and so they had the information on the table about all the things that actually did happen to our businesses. Oh, but and I don't want to get into all those. But this case, yep, that's right. Yeah, this case, yep, and then this next case.
All of the other things.
All of the other things, and then going through my personal situation. You're from the United States. Yes. You arrived to Poland on this year. Yes. You've been owning these restaurant businesses. Yes. You left Poland about this date. Yes.
Right.
So it was all lining up. And actually, he said, you own the restaurants in the city center, right? And that's when I said, well, one of them is in Praga, and the other one is in Dolny Makoltov. So it's not really, I don't know if you called it the city center, but I'll go with it, right?
Right.
I'm not going to question things at this time. So then they start asking about whether or not someone was trying to extort money from me, right? Which is where now we're getting to where the issue is. And I'm going, no. And if I may go back to one of the original issues that I mentioned, where the CBA and the embassy were involved, also at that time, we were not being extorted.
Right.
But it looked like we were, and the police were livid with my partner and me because they said, for sure, for someone to be doing what they were doing to you guys, for sure, someone's tried to extort money or getting something from you. And we were going, no. Right. And this is why this situation ended up with a gentleman who was not.
He was kind of insane.
Yes.
Yeah.
Here I am once again with the police basically saying, clearly, someone was trying to extort something from you.
Right.
And the conversation for about an hour got more and more intense, where the guy was getting really frustrated that I was not revealing any information. But I'm saying,
you're not helping his case.
Not helping him. Yeah. This is where another really silly thing started happening. So then he revealed photographs of the guys in the gang that evidently were doing this stuff.
Yeah.
Do you recognize any of them? I'm looking at them. Sorry, no. And then the crazy thing, he says, brings my wife into it, and he mentions a name that is my wife's maiden name.
Right.
And he says, well, you do know that there are Russian oligarch that actually had the same last name
as your wife.
As my wife. And just started making a connection with my wife. And I'm sitting there at this time going, this is getting really weird now.
Yeah.
And I don't know how that was connected to this particular this group of bad guys.
Yeah.
And I don't know how my wife would have been connected to that at all.
To a Russian oligarch.
Right. So then he starts getting into revealing more information about this particular person that he thinks is me.
Yeah. And
he revealed the address where this person lived. I've been to this guy's house, and that's when it clicked.
That you realized who this other guy is.
Holy shit! You guys got the wrong guy.
Yeah.
And then he started getting mad that it is possible that they got the wrong guy, and I said, no, his name is this.
Right. You identified him.
Yes. He lives it's the restaurant is not ours. It's this one.
Yeah, because he was also doing restaurants.
Also doing restaurants.
All these things kind of matched.
And it was an American guy who arrived on this date, wears glasses. He's much bigger than I am. So, I mean, even just the likeness is just not the case. Evidently, this person actually was
extorted.
Extorted in a big way and left the country very quickly. And the police were trying to actually have a case against them.
To bring this gang to justice. Yeah.
And so it ended around 2:00 in the morning with
in Częstochowa.
In Częstochowa, they were all absolutely
and you hadn't been able to call your wife or tell
no. It was awful.
Yeah.
I mean, I can look back on it now and laugh, but at this point.
So how did they react when they realized that this is just not the right guy in the end?
The only guy who apologized was the guy who drove me to the train station. And they at least bought my ticket.
Right.
I took
they did buy your ticket.
Like a 5:30, 5 o'clock train from Częstochowa back to Warsaw.
Right.
And yeah.
And so with the other guy, do you know in the end did he end up testifying or not?
I do not know, and I've elected to not raise the issue just because.
Yeah, it could be kind of weird. Yeah.
Friend, I'm sure if he went through what they said that he was going through was not a pleasant thing.
Okay, well, the reason why I wanted, because you've told me part of this story before, most of the story, and the reason why I wanted to talk about it is because this is a great example for even guys in my sector that are doing investigations and doing, it is so hard not to wind up with the red herring. And we'll get clients that'll say, we want you, don't do any interviews, just do OSINT. like open source. Just do media, do anybody, okay, well, yeah, I know, but it's not that clear, and there's a lot of, especially in Poland, there's so many people with the same names. Or not even just Poland, Czech Republic, Russia, everywhere. Say, look, that's a way to do it, but there's a point where we're going to have to probably go talk to somebody, or at least talk to somebody that knows somebody. And a lot of us have been in this crazy position where you're like working and working, you're like, this has got to be it, this has got to be it. And then you waste tons of time and you realize, actually, no, it's not the right guy. Most of the time, a lot of the times, maybe not most of the time, but a lot of the times, that actually comes down to human intel, where you have to go and meet somebody and talk to them, and then you realize, oh man, this guy's not 6'6", this guy's 4'5", or something bizarre, right? But in your case, I could see easily how there's too many things that matched, right?
Yeah.
Now, they should have apologized, though. But at the same time...
One guy did, so...
One guy did. But
he was the guy who drove me down all the way.
But that was a long time ago, too. That was a long time ago. And what was that, 10 years ago or more?
2010. So
2000. Oh, so even more. Oh, man, that was also at the height of some really crazy things, because they were trying to put the Mokotów Mafia in prison, but also there was a gang that was kidnapping, actually somebody I know, also in restaurants, also a foreigner, kidnapped him. They were not actually really Polish. They were beyond that. Kidnapped him and tortured him for his pin, and blowtorched his leg. And just on that day, it turned out his pin just wouldn't work. And I thought he was lying, and he was definitely not lying. His pin just wouldn't work. And so he survived. That's a crazy story. Maybe one day we'll have him on here. But the police were actually, that was kind of the end of going after some of that very hardcore gang era. When they were still so active. So I can kind of sort of sympathize with them, although I do see how this happens. Now we jump to literally today, and you're back, dealing with it. Is there any difference at all, do you think, or does it still kind of feel the same? I know it's a different type of police, too. So.
I actually perceived, with all the craziness that was back in the 1990s, the police actually... They knew what was going on.
Yeah.
The challenge was that a lot of the guys that were running the security outfits were ex-policemen. Yeah. Which was a good and bad thing, right? Yeah. At least in the businesses that we were in, many people thought that we were the mafia, because how could we be running, a bunch of young American guys running a nightclub in Warsaw at the time without not having any problems? Right. Right. So there was the assumption that we were involved.
And plenty of people did. Plenty of people did have problems in restaurants. And there was a time when I don't know, hardly any restaurants or clubs could get away with not having protection. Right.
So I've been doing business here for 30 years in a sector that tends to have that kind of stuff happen, and we've not. And so
now, just going to your sector in general, restaurant business, and you've also been involved with just real estate in general, right? Do you hear less of these types of stories? I mean, does it still happen? Does it still exist? Or
violence is picking up now, which is the casual violence. Another family member and friend were involved. They were also in a club where they got drugged, and someone stole the phone and tried, and they did get money off this person's. It was
credit card.
They got drugged. And out for 5 hours, right?
We've seen a lot of that, or I was talking about on one of the shows, the scam where somebody goes to a strip bar and they make sure they slip something in his drink, and they make sure that the girl gets him to the bancomat, but she helps him, but he dials in and he gives the money to her. So then, and they make sure it's on film, so it's hard to prosecute, even though it's completely.
What frustrates me with that is I'm sure that the police know about that.
Oh,
and that's where a bit of my frustration.
No, they've actually, just to again, I'm becoming the big police apologist today, but again, the police just shut down. I wrote about this. You can go online and find one of the crime summaries. I think the last crime summary that I did. They just shut down a bunch of organized crime gangs that were using that method.
Okay.
But it was very difficult to do. And you've also got the combo of, one, you have so many guys that if they're dabbling in the marginaise, they don't want to go forward because it can, their wife might find out. But then there was a real problem with actually getting prosecutions, because on film, because they would make sure there's a film above their own bankomat, like in a strip bar. On film, you've got the guy taking out money and giving it himself. He's not being taken from him.
Sure.
It's very hard to prosecute somebody. You know, when he goes to the cops a few days later, there's nothing in his blood by then. He kind of doesn't remember what happened. He knows that he got ripped off. And then the club cooperates fully. Oh, no, man, he just had a good time here. He paid this girl a lot of money. It's, you know, she's a stripper. She danced very well, I guess. So that kind of thing. But as far as, I do think we are seeing a pickup, unfortunately, in just kind of like the street violence that you're going to run into in New York City or in Belgium, in Antwerp. Or it's just, maybe it's just more people.
Right.
You know, more people
it's
just
becoming more normal.
Becoming in a way more normal. But as far as the kind of stories that, you know, about the clubs or the restaurants having to pay off the mafia, do you ever hear that anymore? No. I almost never hear that now. Unless it's literally like a guy in smaller towns.
It did happen in the 90s, but it was on a much smaller scale.
Yeah.
But we never had that issue. We just had a smart security group that was able to protect, because we had a large number of businesses that were here.
Right.
This was, you know, win-win, and they were ex-policemen, so you know, they knew all the bad guys, and
couple steps forward, one step back, couple steps forward. That's kind of history of Poland, though. But anyway, look, I know that you've been dealing with some stress today and all that, so I'm going to let you go.
Right.
But I appreciate you coming in.
Absolutely.
It was really interesting.
I love what you do. I think it's great watching your.
Hey, Merry Christmas. Throw me my hat, Evgeny. Evgeny's the silent, Merry Christmas. We got to say Merry Christmas. Just throw it. Oh, there you go. I got my hat. Actually, I played a guitar gig the other day and it messed me up because it got in the way of the strings. But anyway, guys, look, Merry Christmas. Happy New Year. We wish you all the best. For those of you that are following the war in Ukraine update, I know there are a lot of Ukrainians out there. You guys hang in there. Tough times. We're praying and hoping that the new year changes for you and for everyone. Otherwise, over and out. We might see you during the Christmas holidays. We might not. I think my wife's going to have something to say about that. But we'll see. Otherwise, you guys stay safe. Merry Christmas. Ciao, ahoy, arrivederci, do widzenia, and bye.